They grow so quickly. It's so easy to propagate and it's so easy to care for. Why isn't it around more? If that's not the sign of a chill, easy plant, I don't know what is. Hello friends, and welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be talking about some more houseplants that are really easy to care for, but slightly less common, things you might not find on your traditional easy care plant list. We're not talking like average monstera and pothos over here. We're talking about some things that are maybe a little bit more uncommon, might be harder to find, it might be a little bit more expensive, but won't add that much extra care into your collection. I have done a similar video before, so this is kind of a part 2. So if you don't find what you want on this list, definitely go check that one out. I will link it in the clickable eye and down below in the description if you want to go watch that. And yeah, really excited to talk about these ones. Before I do though, I want to say if you're new here and you don't know me already, hi, my name is Emma and I make houseplanty content all over the internet. So if you want to follow along with my houseplanty journey and maybe learn something along the way, stick around, watch some more of my videos, and subscribe to my channel. If you're not new here, welcome back. I really appreciate you returning. Let's get on into these plants. This first one I actually very rarely see for sale. I have seen it popping up a little bit more frequently nowadays, but back when I got it a few years ago, I hadn't seen it anywhere. This right here is a Pellionia Pulchra. And I think traditionally they're sold as terrarium plants, but I have never grown my Pellionia Pulchra in a terrarium and it has been absolutely fine. And also, I grew this from a single cutting and it's got like so many different plants in here. It's just multiplied over the years and I basically don't think about it at all. I do have this one in my IKEA cabinet, which does get grow light a whole chunk of the day, as well as it is slightly more humid than my average home, but my home is generally quite humid as it is, so it could probably live just out in my home fine. But I find that this one is really fascinating. I had never seen anything like this one before. It's got kind of almost velvety leaves. I feel like they're closer to a sort of suede material. I think this is also known as, oh, it's got an alternate name of some sort of like begonia, like watermelon begonia vine. Because like a watermelon begonia doesn't exist, as far as I know. But it's kind of got these like dark versions of little watermelons on there. I have mine growing trailing. I haven't seen anyone grow this on a moss pole or anything before, but I'm assuming in a terrarium they might like creep up the sides of the walls, or if you've got bark in there, they might try and climb up that. I'm perfectly fine having mine in a trailing pot and it seems to like that quite a lot. But honestly, I think it has mostly just multiplied within there itself. You can kind of see there's some little guys poking their little heads out ready to come and join the whole Pellionia Pulchra family here. But it is also really easy to propagate. I think I have mostly propagated this one in water and sphagnum, and it roots quite quickly and you can put it back in the top or give it to friends. I've also been really giving this one to lots of friends. It doesn't look huge and I know I've had it for several years at this point, but the fact that I started out as a single cutting and I have given so many cuttings to friends. Basically any swap I do, I like to give this one a chance because not very many people have it, and so I want to just like spread the joy of the Pellionia Pulchra. So yeah, it is a really cool, kind of weird one that I really don't see very often, and it's a surprise because it's so easy to propagate and it's so easy to care for. Why isn't it around more? This next one is much more similar to something that you can find even as common as in a grocery store. It is a Dracaena, but this one specifically is the Dracaena White Jewel. And I love this one. One of very few Dracaena that I do keep in my home, because the typical like dragon tree one with the very like long skinny leaves that I have had before and I have literally purchased at the supermarket, those ones Cleo likes to go after because I think she likes their long skinny leaves. Whereas this one she doesn't really care for as much, which is great because they are toxic to pets. So not the best thing to have accessible to your animals, and why I haven't been able to keep other Dracaenas in my home, because I think they're cool and they're easy to get your hands on, but just don't work for me in my home. Whereas this one is a little bit less common. I don't really see them sold as much, and honestly I do kind of think cooler, because one, Cleo doesn't go after it, and two, I really love this variegation. Like these sort of pin stripes, almost like racing stripes it has. I think it is really fun, and this one I grew from propagation again, and I don't really care that much for it. There has been times when I leave it to dry out almost entirely, and I'm sure it's not loving that much, but it has totally tolerated it and is still growing phenomenally for me. I think these few leaves at the top are quite new, which is exciting. This one is currently living in my kitchen, which also doesn't get very much light. It does have a window, I think it's northwest facing, but it is pretty much entirely blocked by a tree, so it's getting fairly low light and still growing regardless. It is a really cool one and a really fun one to add to your collection, to add a bit of texture and like difference. It looks so different to all the other plants I have. I feel like there's nothing quite like it. And for me, someone who can't take care of spider plants to save their life, it kind of fills that spider plant vibe that I do really like. I do think spider plants are cool, I just can't take care of them. And so this one kind of fills that in a much easier form for me. Got a Hoya on this list because I do find Hoyas to be fairly easy. And this one is not the most common one out there, but you can get your hands on it. It is a Hoya Crassiopetiolata Splash. I know that name is a little bit of a mouthful, but it's definitely worth it, because if you like splashy Hoyas like I do, this one is one of my absolute favorites. It's not quite as silver as some other splashy Hoyas I have are, but I think just the amount of splashes on that dark green makes for a really, really interesting plant. And oh my god, again, I grew this one from a cutting. I haven't grown all of these from a cutting, I promise, but these first few I have, and they are doing so well. I'm pretty sure when I originally got this one it was maybe like 1 or 2 leaves, and I've been able to get it to grow almost all the way around its trellis now. This one's currently living in the office on some plant shelves that get grow light for a good chunk of the day. For a while, quite a long time actually, those shelves I didn't have the grow lights on in the mornings. I only had them on in the evenings after sunset, and it was still producing quite a lot of growth. But now that I have kept the lights on more, they go on I think maybe 7 a.m. or 10 a.m. or something and stay on until 10 p.m. Since I have increased the length of the light it's getting, it has started to grow a whole lot more. I'm definitely seeing more spots where new growth is coming in, and that's really exciting, because I would just love to have a big bushy one of these. It's just so cool and so easy and chill. And this one actually did get flat mites as well during my big flat mite debacle last year, and I'm pretty sure I have gotten rid of it. You can still see a couple of tiny spots of the sulfur treatment. I have washed it off, I promise, but I think that they are gone, especially since I am seeing some new growth in there. That is a really good sign, some like baby new growth. So I feel like I'm in a good spot with this one, and I definitely recommend it to anyone who wants to have something that's a little bit out there on Hoya, something a little bit more intense than like your sort of average Crimson Princess or Croniana. This is a really good one, and I think they are a little bit more on the expensive side, but you can get yourself a small one, and though it does take a while to grow like this, if you give it good enough light. And I'm not saying like direct light probably wouldn't be the best for this one, but prolonged hours of bright indirect light will be your key for this one. I also let it dry out almost completely between waterings, or completely when I get lazy, because the plants in the office I do not water nearly enough, so they tend to dry out pretty fully between waterings. I know I've spoken about this one recently as well, but she is one of my absolute favorite plants. It is the fern leaf cactus. And this one was a wish list plant for me. As soon as I saw it online, I knew that I had to have it. And I was able to get my hands on one last year, which is great. And since then, it has grown so well. I'll insert a clip of what it looked like right when I got it, and you can see how much it has grown since then. It is freaking huge now and sprawling and gorgeous. And I'm pretty sure I actually had trouble with thrips on this one this winter, but I think I've gotten rid of the problem. There was a little bit of damage on the leaves because of it, but that's okay. You can't really see it unless you're looking really hard. Like from here, you wouldn't be like, oh yeah, that plant's damaged. Whereas because I can look at it every day, I'm like, oh yeah, this plant is damaged. But it's really good at hiding it, and it's also fairly easy care. I don't need to worry about it all that much. It is an epiphytic cactus, so it's perfectly fine living in my quite humid home without any extra added humidity. Lately, since I've had the windows open and it's been warmer outside, the humidity's been lower and it's been tolerating it just fine. And this one lives almost exclusively underneath a grow light that's on for 12 hours a day, but it's not an incredibly bright one, and it still seems to be putting out pretty good growth. It's not very etoliated or growing leggy or anything. It's just still putting out nice new growth, and it's very happy. I also, until very recently, had this one in a pot that didn't have a cash pot under it, and so it was hanging, and when I watered it, I had to bring it into the shower to water it, and doing so meant that I did not water it very often because the process of bringing all my hanging plants to the shower to water them was a lot. So it ended up drying out almost completely and staying dry for a little while for quite a long time before giving it more water, and to the point where I noticed it getting floppy leaves, which is a good indicator that it's time for new water, but try not to let it do that too often because it will thank you if you actually give it water the right amount, which I think is letting it get like 75 to 100% dry and then watering it in there. Also, this is a really good one to give your home tropical vibes, especially as a hanging plant. I feel like not very many hanging plants grow outwards, but at this length, the weight of the branches doesn't pull them down quite yet, so it is quite a big hanging plant, and so it makes a really nice statement in my home. So I think it adds to my jungle vibes quite nicely. This one is a variegated version of a very common houseplant. It is the variegated heartleaf philodendron. And these ones are still not very easy to come by, which is a surprise because they are relatively easy to take care of. I actually have mine in a mixed pot with some normal heartleaf, and they're getting the exact same care. They're growing pretty much exactly the same. I think the variegated one might be growing a tiny bit slower because it doesn't have as much chlorophyll in its leaves, which is needed to produce energy for the plant. So I get why it might be going a little bit slower, but it is still pushing out leaf after leaf after leaf and really loving its life. I don't think it's that much harder to care for than your average heartleaf. So if you can get your hands on one, I know they are still a little bit more expensive and harder to come by, but if you can get a cutting, they're totally easy to grow from cuttings. I grew this one from a cutting, and it's been totally fine. It did take a minute to get going in there, but now that it's got several leaves on it, I swear it's putting out a new leaf maybe every couple of weeks at this point, which is really good. I'm enjoying it. I like getting to watch it. Eventually I will chop and prop this one and make it a bit of a fuller plant because it's it's looking a tiny bit scraggly at the minute, but that's just because I'm growing it from cuttings and it's a small one, which is fine. But eventually I would love like a big, bushy, variegated heartleaf. Oh, that would be amazing. So one day we'll get there, and I'm just so excited for that day because the variegation on these leaves is something special. And also, oh my goodness, I don't have like a brand new one right now, but when they come in ever so slightly redder and like pinky red, and it kind of makes it look like a tricolor leaf at the beginning of its leafdom and then it'll fade into the like classic cream and green. So it is a really cool process to watch, and again, really easy. This one I also have in my IKEA cabinet purely because it's the easiest place for it, and I wanted to make sure that while it was propagating, it was getting lots of light and like pretty consistent humidity, nothing too fluctuatey. It's been enjoying its life in there, and I think once it has grown a little bit bigger, I could definitely take this out and just have it in my average home and it would be fine. Just like your normal heartleaf. So yeah, I do love my little mixed pot of heartleaf, but I definitely love this side more. I know I haven't had this one for very long, but I do know that it is a very easy care plant. This is a Raphidophora Decursiva, and I have actually had another one back here for maybe like 9 months or so, and that first one was a mid-cut and hadn't produced new growth. It is now producing a leaf, freaking finally. They do take a bit of time if you're propagating them from a mid-cut to get that new growth point growing in, but once they have that growth point and they are actively growing, they grow so quickly. I'm pretty sure mine has put out at least 1 or 2 leaves, probably this one, since I have had it, which is pretty crazy. And you can see it is desperate for something to climb. I will be giving it something to climb very soon. I just haven't gotten around to it yet. I want to join the two together onto a single moss pole in hopes that I can get them to grow cool, mature, big Raphidophora Decursiva leaves. The leaves of the mature plant are so fun. Like, they just get more and more, they just grow more and more lobes of the leaf, which is really cool. So right now, the most I have is this like 3 on several of them, but eventually you'll get 5 and then 7 and then 9, and it can get so big. And I'm hoping that once I do have it on a pole and it has something to climb and help it mature, it'll get there. But it is a really cool one. Basically, if you can care for your average monstera, your average philodendron, you can take care of this one. And it is also often misnamed. So I think it is a Raphidophora Decursiva dragontail. I think the dragontail is the common name. But it's commonly misnamed as a philodendron dragontail or an epipremnum dragontail. And it is neither an epipremnum nor a philodendron. It is a Raphidophora related to the Raphidophora tetrasperma, which is, again, a really quick growing plant and probably its more common cousin. It is a really cool one, and again, these ones are getting more popular and more readily available. As of right now, they're not very expensive, and you can get a decent sized one like this for not very much. Also, they don't need incredible amounts of light. They don't want to have any like prolonged sunlight. They're growing in sort of like jungle vibes, climbing up trees, so they're underneath the canopy layer, aren't getting any hours of like strong direct sunlight. So bright and direct is fine, maybe some dappled sun, but you also don't want to put them in like too dark either, because then they can grow leggy, which would look like longer stems than that. You can see this one, because since it's been in my home, I've not had it in the most ideal conditions yet. It has grown slightly more leggy, like the internodal space has increased, which is fine. I'm okay with that, but I want to get it into a slightly better spot, and hopefully that will help with that and let it grow less leggy, because I want a nice like bushy one of these. Next up, we have a begonia. This is a Begonia White Ice, and again, I grew this from a cutting. Right, I'm sorry, but all of these plants, if they're easy enough for me to grow them from a cutting, they are easy enough plants. And this was actually the first begonia that I was able to grow kind of at all. And it really led me into my love for begonias, because they are so freaking cool. And before this one, I really could not take care of them. But the white ice is kind of similar to your regular polka dot begonia that, again, you can find in many, many places. But it has more spots and like really cool pointed leaves. They almost look sharp in here, which is quite cool. And especially when it's getting a lot of light, the polka dots, especially around the ends of the leaves, can get really dense and make it look very icy. And so it's kind of a lot more silver than many of the other sort of cane begonias out there. But I will say, begonias, for some, you might be able to keep them in soil. I have never been able to keep a begonia in soil alive. And so semi-hydro has been the only way that I've been able to keep them happy and healthy. And I think that is because they are a little bit more thirsty than I thought they would be. They do like a bit more consistent watering in my experience. Given if they're in soil, I cannot recommend anything because I obviously haven't been able to keep them alive. But in semi-hydro with a constant sort of reservoir of water at the bottom of the pot, absolutely fine. They can drink as much as they want and you don't need to worry about them like getting wilty and fainting or freaking out because there's not enough water. Also, these ones are super easy to propagate. I think I actually need to propagate this one again sometime soon. And when you do chop and propagate them, it causes them to branch out a bit, which is quite fun because you get a bushier plant. And when you propagate, you can chop that off, and once it's got roots, put it in the bottom again. I find water propagating is best for begonias, especially if they're going into semi-hydro, because their roots are so fine. Like really, really, really incredibly fine. I don't know if you'll be able to see any. Okay, yeah, they're like all coming out the bottom here. But I promise those are healthy roots. They just don't look healthy. They've got a bit of semi-hydro sludge on them. Which is fine. I should probably give them a wash. But they're very, very fine roots. And so if I propagated them in something like sphagnum moss, it would probably be really difficult to get all that moss off, to get it into something like semi-hydro. If you're putting it in soil, it's probably fine. But since I do keep them solely in semi-hydro, it just makes a lot more sense to propagate them in water. Another one that I have in semi-hydro is my variegated peace lily. And I know for a lot of people, normal peace lilies are fairly easy plants, easy care for them. They're personally not my cup of tea, average peace lilies. I don't really like how they look in my home, but the variegated ones are so, so cool, in my opinion. I just think they're like way cooler. Like take a plant that you think is meh, put some variegation on it, and you're like, heck yeah, this plant is great now. Which is kind of funny. I don't really understand why my mind does that, but it does. But this one is another easy care plant, similar to the peace lily. They're just fairly chill, and they'll tell you if they need water. I have put mine into semi-hydro because I don't want it to have to tell me when it needs water. I want it to be able to take all of the water it wants, being in a self-watering pot, and that is what it's doing now. So I'm hoping that it liked the situation. I have also only recently got this one, but I've heard so many stories about how easy peace lilies are, and I can't imagine that the variegated one would be much different. It might require a little bit more light than your average peace lily because of the variegation, but honestly, I wouldn't worry about it too much. I've kind of got mine in a dark corner, but it's on top of my IKEA cabinet because this one is, again, toxic to pets, and I don't want Cleo to get anywhere near it because I don't want her even trying to nibble these leaves because it's not going to be good for them. They can be really dangerous, so do keep them out of reach of your pets and your kids. Unfortunately, it has to be done because they are not safe. Also, the weird thing about me and peace lilies is that I do not care for their flowers. I do kind of like them more when they have the sort of green in there. I think it looks cooler than the plain white, similar to how I like the leaves when they have a bit of white on them instead of just plain green. But for the most part, I don't really care for the plant flowers. I'm not in it for the flowers. I just like a really nice leaf instead. Next up, we have the Boobie Cactus. It is a type of myrtillo cactus. I'm not going to say its full name because I definitely cannot pronounce it, but this one is very, very easy care, but again, kind of harder to find. I really struggled to find a Boobie Cactus for quite a long time, especially one for a reasonable price. They are a bit more on the expensive side, and I think it is because they're slightly more slow growing. That being said, I got this last year and it was 6 boobs tall. So I think it was about that tall when I got it. I only know this because I was looking back at a picture the other day and I was like, whoa, mine's definitely more than 6 boobs tall now. So it was 6 boobs tall when I got it, and now it is 7, 8 and growing on its 9th boob in height, which is pretty cool, and I have done essentially nothing to this in the time I've had it. The only change that I've made is I've put it into semi-hydro substrate, though not with a self-watering reservoir. It's just in essentially non-organic rocks, which kind of mimics the substrate it would be in its natural habitat. It wouldn't have that much actual soil around its roots. But when I was switching this one, I also found that it was infested with root mealies, which I think I have solved that problem now, which is good. I have treated it for those, and I don't know, it still grew 2.5 boobs in height while it had mealybugs in its roots. If that's not the sign of a chill, easy plant, I don't know what is. And also this one does have the like novelty of being breast shaped as a bit of fun. And I've seen loads of people who put them in like boobie pots as well, so they're very booby, and it's fun. Bit of feminism here in like a mostly, I feel like most cactuses are kind of phallic, and like they got the spikes, whereas these are like, they're boobs and they still have the spikes. But yeah, it is a super easy care plant. As long as it's getting enough light, it has been growing quite fine for me. I do hope that it does kind of thicken up a little bit, because down at the bottom it is quite wide and it gets quite a lot thinner once we get to the top of it. But I think that will come in time. I'm hoping that it's like, it doesn't look exfoliated. The boobs are still pretty evenly spaced throughout, so I think we're fine. I hope it'll just keep growing really well for me. And lastly, we have the Snow Queen Pothos, or the Epipremnum aurum Snow Queen, which I'm pretty sure is just a really highly variegated marble queen pothos, where it's got mostly white in its leaves, but I'm not sure if you can get a normal marble queen to like turn into a snow queen, and that is what makes them a little bit harder to find. I feel like you need to buy one as a snow queen, and it'll stay like that, as opposed to buying a marble queen and hoping that it's got good enough genetics to become a snow queen. Because even in the bits of the plant that are less variegated, like they have whole swaths of green in these leaves, the white parts are still almost entirely white with a few tiny little flecks of green. They probably would like slightly higher light than your average golden pothos, but I don't give it any sort of extra care other than that. And if you can put it in a slightly brighter spot, that's great. I don't think it necessarily needs it though. Mine's not in particularly bright of a location. It's probably getting medium light most of the day, aside from the fact that it is right up next to my IKEA cabinet. And so from there it does get a little bit of grow light through the glass. So a little bit of extra light, but I wouldn't say it's getting anything special or much more than anything else in my home. I could in theory put it closer to a window, but I'm happy with where it is. I like to see it. It's right underneath my TV, so I get to like look at it every day, which is fun. But yeah, it is a really, really cool one and super easy care and doesn't require anything extra. And I also let this one dry out fully between waterings to the point where it gets floppy as well. It's just growing really, really well for me, putting out new leaves almost all the time. So that is it. Those are 10 more easy care uncommon houseplants that can spice up your collection without adding too much extra work to it. I really hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up down below and leave a comment on other easy care uncommon houseplants that you find, or if you have different experiences to these. I'd like to hear it, because I am not the only one who's experienced these houseplants. So if you agree with any of these, let us know down below. If you don't agree, that's also a perfectly valid opinion and I want to hear it. So put it down below in the comments and I can't wait to see it. Also, subscribe for more. I hope you're having a fantastic day and I will see you in the next one. Don't forget to keep growing. Bye!